Some women don't need to say a word to unsettle a man's soul. They don't raise their voice. They don't argue. They don't chase. They simply become a mirror he cannot escape, and that is why he fears them. Imagine this. You're standing in front of a woman who no longer explains herself. She no longer softens her edges to be understood, nor bends herself into shapes to be accepted. She just is. And in her silent confidence, a strange phenomenon begins to unfold. The man who once craved her closeness now trembles beneath her distance. His ego, accustomed to being fed by her validation, suddenly faces an unbearable void. That is the moment when Carl Jung's concept of individuation becomes more than an abstract theory. It becomes an emotional earthquake. Jung said that individuation is the process of becoming whole, of integrating the unconscious into consciousness, of confronting the shadow and transcending the roles society demands. But few speak about what happens when a woman completes this journey, when she stops performing for love and starts embodying her own archetype. A man may say he desires a strong woman. He may even convince himself he is ready for her power. But when she actually steps into her full self, when she becomes the woman who chooses rather than needs, she triggers something ancient and terrifying in his unconscious mind. Because here's the secret, men are not just afraid of rejection, they are afraid of irrelevance, they are afraid of becoming unnecessary in the eyes of a woman who has tasted her own sovereignty. Jung called this confrontation with the anima, the feminine archetype inside every man, a moment of reckoning. When a woman individuates, she forces a man to meet his own internal feminine, the parts of himself he has long suppressed. He will see in her a reflection of his unlived life, his unhealed wounds, his forgotten desires. And it is not love that makes him spiral. It is the collision with his own shadow. Some women sense this shift intuitively. They notice how a man will pull away when they grow too silent, too detached from the game of emotional caretaking. She no longer tries to prove her worth, and in that moment, he feels a loss he cannot name. It is not rejection in the traditional sense. It is the death of the role he once played in her story. If a man is unprepared for this transformation, he will unconsciously fight it. He will create distance, not because he wants to, but because his ego cannot bear the weight of being seen without the pedestal of masculine control. Her silence becomes a mirror reflecting back his emotional immaturity. Her independence exposes the parts of him that never learned to self-soothe, the parts that secretly believe love must involve dominance, control, or rescue. And yet, paradoxically, this is also the moment when obsession begins. For in the very act of walking away from needing him, she activates the deepest chambers of his psyche, the chambers where craving lives, the chambers where desire and fear are intertwined like twin serpents. This is not ordinary longing, it is a spiritual addiction, an ache not for possession but for completion. Jung would say that the man is not really obsessed with her, he is obsessed with what she symbolizes. She becomes the embodiment of the self he has not yet individuated. She represents wholeness, freedom, and the terrifying idea that love can exist without control. He doesn't know whether to worship her or resent her, and so he does both. You've seen this happen, haven't you? The man who couldn't stop calling, texting, orbiting your life, not because you chased him, but because you stopped playing by the rules, because you became the woman who says less, demands less, and needs nothing. This is the first silent trigger. When you stop explaining yourself, you expose his dependency on your validation. The second trigger is even more subtle. It happens when you stop asking for emotional reassurance. You no longer need to be told where you stand because you've learned to stand alone, and this terrifies him more than any argument or ultimatum ever could. He is used to the dance of insecurity, the push and pull, the back and forth. When you step out of that game, you become unpredictable, and unpredictability in the male psyche often feels like danger, because if he cannot control you, he fears he might lose you to forces he doesn't understand. The third trigger is the most profound. It's the moment you embrace solitude without apology, The moment you find joy in your own company, purpose in your own path, and love within your own soul, this is not loneliness, it is liberation, and it shakes him to his core. Because now he knows you were never his to begin with. A woman who walks the path of individuation becomes an enigma to the man still trapped in ego games. He cannot categorize her, he cannot decode her silence, and perhaps most frightening of all, he cannot rescue her because she does not need saving. Carl Jung understood this dynamic long before modern relationship psychology gave it labels. He knew that the feminine principle, when fully embodied, forces a man to confront his own incompleteness. She represents not just a romantic partner, but the anima, the feminine aspect of his own psyche, calling him toward growth he may not yet be ready to face. When a woman stops explaining herself, when she no longer offers justifications for her boundaries, her desires, or her solitude, she enters sacred ground. She is no longer performing the role of the pleasing woman, the agreeable partner, or the emotional caretaker. She has crossed into the domain of the sovereign feminine, and this makes her emotionally dangerous to the unprepared man. This isn't cruelty, it's evolution. Men may fantasize about this kind of woman, the one who carries mystery in her eyes and silence on her lips. But when they actually meet her, the subconscious reaction is often fear masked as distance, confusion, or even subtle sabotage. Why? Because she represents the death of the boy self, the part of him that still wants mothering rather than mirroring. Her silence says, I am not here to complete you, I am here to complete myself. This activates something primal in him. The ancient male archetype, protector, pursuer, provider, suddenly feels useless in front of a woman who has mastered emotional self-sufficiency. And yet, paradoxically, she becomes irresistible. The more she detaches from the roles he expects, the more magnetic she becomes. Have you noticed this pattern? You stop texting first and suddenly he watches your stories from the shadows. You stop over-explaining why you're busy, and now he circles back with unexpected messages asking how you've been. You stop justifying your silence, and suddenly he's imagining all the reasons for your absence, all the scenarios where he might have lost his place in your world. But this reaction is not about love in the conventional sense, it's about projection. Jung taught that we do not fall in love with people, we fall in love with symbols. We project our unmet needs, our shadow desires, our childhood wounds onto another person and call it attraction. So when a woman individuates, when she becomes whole within herself, the man who encounters her experiences a disorienting collapse of his usual romantic scripts. He cannot possess her because she has already possessed herself. He cannot fix her because she is not broken. He cannot define her because she no longer conforms to roles that require definition. And this is where forbidden male psychology enters the room, the kind few people dare to speak about. Deep inside, many men have a subconscious terror of emotional irrelevance. They fear becoming obsolete to the woman they once believed needed them. When she no longer seeks his approval, his guidance, or his reassurance, he faces a truth his ego cannot easily swallow. He is not her source of wholeness. This realization can cause one of two reactions. The first is regression. He may retreat, create distance, or unconsciously sabotage the connection. He may tell himself, she's too much or she's changed, when in fact, she has simply stopped shrinking to fit his comfort zone. The second reaction is obsession. He may become fixated, circling back in ways he cannot explain even to himself. He may feel drawn to her energy with an intensity that frightens him, because her detachment, her refusal to explain or justify has cracked something open in his psyche. She has become the anima figure, the siren, the mystery, the untouchable force of feminine power. And yet she is just a woman living her truth. This is the paradox of individuation. The more you step into your authentic self, the more you trigger projections in others. Some will hate you for it, some will obsess over you for it, but none will forget you. The path of the individuated woman is not always lonely, but it is always sacred. She no longer plays by the rules of codependence. She no longer explains her choices to make others comfortable. She no longer dims her light to soothe fragile egos. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable, not because she chases, but because she leaves a psychic imprint, the kind that lingers in silence, the kind that reappears in dreams. You may not even realize how powerful you've become until you witness the reactions, until you see how a man, seemingly strong in his outer world, begins to crumble quietly under the weight of your absence. Not because you punished him, not because you manipulated him, but because you reminded him of his own unfinished journey toward wholeness. The woman who embraces individuation becomes a mirror, one that reflects not what the man wants to see, but what he must confront in himself. This is why her power feels so unbearable to him. She is not merely walking away from him, she is walking toward herself, and in doing so, she forces him to face his own internal void. Carl Jung described this as the tension between the persona, the mask we wear for the world, and the shadow, the parts of us we keep hidden even from ourselves. Most relationships operate in the space of persona to persona. We play roles, we follow scripts, we offer each other polished versions of who we think we should be, but the individuated woman no longer plays these games. She becomes a living, breathing embodiment of shadow integration. Her existence silently whispers to the man, "You must meet me in your full self, or you will lose me." And this terrifies him because to meet her there, he must descend into his own darkness. He must confront the parts of himself that crave control, validation, or emotional dependence. He must release the fantasy of rescuing her and instead rescue himself from the shallow waters of unexamined desire. Do you know how many women unconsciously sabotage their power by softening it too soon? They feel a man's discomfort with their independence and they retreat. They explain themselves to ease his ego. They justify their success, their solitude, or their standards to appear less threatening. They trade their sovereignty for temporary connection. But a woman who has tasted the freedom of individuation will not make that trade. She understands something crucial, that true love, true partnership cannot exist where fear controls the dynamic. If a man fears her power, he cannot love her fully. If he fears her silence, he cannot hear her truth. If he fears her boundaries, he cannot hold her with respect. And so she waits, not passively, not with desperation, but with the quiet dignity of someone who knows her worth. She knows that the man capable of meeting her in the depths will not be the one who tries to dim her light. He will not ask her to explain away her strength. He will not shrink from her silence or her standards. Instead, he will sit with his own shadows. He will wrestle with his projections. He will realize that his fear of her power is, in fact, a fear of his own unrealized potential. Jung called this process the alchemy of the soul, the transformation of raw ego into conscious awareness. And it is only through this alchemy that a man becomes capable of loving a woman who no longer needs him. She triggers his awakening, but she does not manage it for him. She plants the seed of transformation, but she does not water it. She stands in her power, knowing that his reaction is not her responsibility. Have you ever noticed that the most dangerous woman in a man's life is not the one who betrays him, but the one who awakens him? Not by seduction, not by strategy, but by refusing to shrink. This is the woman he will remember when he cannot sleep at night. The woman whose silence echoes louder than any argument. The woman whose absence weighs heavier than any presence that ever tried to please him. She does not do this out of cruelty, but out of alignment. She has learned that her energy is sacred. Her life is her own. Her purpose is not to soothe his ego, but to live in her fullest expression, knowing that her wholeness will attract either evolution or exile from those who encounter her. And so the question becomes, can he evolve? Can he dismantle the parts of himself that see love as ownership? Can he release the need to be needed and instead choose to be present? Can he sit in the discomfort of loving a woman who walks beside him, not behind him, nor beneath him? If he can, he will meet a partner, not a project, a mirror, not a muse, a woman, not an illusion. But if he cannot, he will cycle through a series of emotional reactions, obsession, avoidance, regret. He will circle back in moments of loneliness, haunted by the echo of her strength. And still she will not explain herself, because the woman who has individuated knows a secret Jung tried to teach the world. The self is not a product of negotiation, it is a product of becoming. And she has become, when a woman steps fully into her individuation, she becomes what Carl Jung called the transcendent function, a bridge between the conscious and unconscious realms. She no longer lives merely as someone's daughter, lover, or wife. She becomes her own axis, her own center of gravity, her own myth, and this is precisely what disturbs the man who has not yet faced himself. To the unawakened masculine, love has often been defined by usefulness, by being needed, by playing the role of protector, provider, or savior. But the individuated woman needs none of these things from him. She can appreciate them, yes, but she does not require them to feel complete. This is where the silent triggers begin. The first is her non-neediness. It unravels the ego scripts he has rehearsed for decades. He finds himself standing before her with his usual tools, flattery, dominance, caretaking, persuasion, but they fall flat. She does not respond the way others have. She is warm, perhaps, but detached, loving, but boundaried, present, but uninterested in playing the emotional caretaker role. And this leaves him in a quiet panic, because if he cannot be her hero, who is he? If he cannot fix her, feed her insecurities, or win her over with grand gestures, what remains of his identity? This is not just about relationships. It is about the existential fear of becoming obsolete, of realizing that the persona he has built, the version of manhood handed to him by culture, family, or past lovers, no longer works here. Not with her. She demands his realness, not his role. The second silent trigger is her stillness. The individuated woman does not chase. She does not cling. She does not flood his phone with messages when he withdraws. She does not beg for attention when he goes quiet. She waits, not for him, but for alignment. And this creates a mirror he cannot escape. In her stillness, he feels his own avoidance, his own projections, his own discomfort with intimacy. He realizes that her silence is not an attack, but a test of his inner stability. Can he handle a woman who will not over-explain her worth? Can he hold space for a partner who respects herself too much to perform for love? Jung would call this a confrontation with the anima, the inner feminine that every man carries but often suppresses. When a woman embodies her power without apology, she activates this hidden part of him. But if he has not integrated it, he will mistake his own discomfort for a problem with her. He may call her cold, distant, or arrogant, but in truth, she is simply being, and it is his inner fragmentation that cannot withstand the weight of her wholeness. The third silent trigger is her refusal to collapse under his confusion. When a man is faced with a woman who will not contort herself to soothe his ego, he often tests her. He may withdraw affection to see if she chases. He may use passive-aggressive silence to see if she explains herself. He may provoke emotional reactions to confirm his power. But she does none of these things. She watches, she observes, she waits, not for manipulation to end, but for him to realize it does not move her. This is when the forbidden side of male desire comes to the surface. He begins to feel an obsessive pull toward her, not because she plays hard to get, but because she is beyond the game. Her energy is not transactional, her love is not performative, her power is not negotiable, and this leaves him with a choice. He can evolve or he can retreat. If he evolves, he will begin the work of true individuation himself. He will examine his fears, his attachments, his need to dominate or control. He will realize that love is not about possession, it is about presence. If he retreats, he will return to safer dynamics. He will find women who need him to play the hero. He will seek relationships where his ego is never threatened. But somewhere, in the back of his mind, he will always remember her. The woman who mirrored his potential, not his persona. The woman who stood in her power without bending. The woman who triggered his deepest fear, not of losing her, but of never fully meeting himself. And this is where the true meaning of Carl Jung's individuation lives, not in self-improvement, but in self-ownership, not in playing roles, but in becoming real, not in chasing love, but in embodying it. For the woman who knows her power, there is no turning back. She will not apologize for her wholeness. She will not explain away her solitude. She will not water down her magic to make herself more palatable. She has learned the final lesson of feminine sovereignty. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.